The kitchen was quiet in a way that felt heavier than silence, the kind that made every small sound seem louder, and Margaret Collins felt it as she sat at the old wooden table with her grandson Ethan, the late afternoon light falling across the worn surface between them, a table that had seen birthdays, arguments, laughter, and long talks that never went anywhere, yet today something felt different from the start, because Ethan had asked to talk with a seriousness that did not fit his age, and Margaret noticed how he sat straighter than usual, how his hands stayed folded as if holding something fragile, and before she could fill the air with small talk, he spoke in a low, careful voice, asking if she ever felt like she had stopped living because she was afraid of losing again, and the question struck her without warning, cutting through years of habits she had built to protect herself, habits that told her to smile politely, keep busy, and never open doors that once led to pain, and for a moment she forgot how to answer because the truth rose too quickly, memories of her late husband, the long nights after he passed, the way love had once filled every corner of her life and then left it echoing, and she tried to keep her tone light as she told Ethan she was not afraid, just careful, but even as she said it, she knew the words sounded thin, because Ethan looked at her with a calm honesty that made it hard to hide, and he replied that careful could slowly turn into lonely. Not accusing her, not pushing, just stating something he had clearly thought about for a long time, and the room seemed to change as those words settled, because Margaret felt something shift inside her chest, something she had kept quiet for years, and she looked at her grandson and saw not a child, but someone who had been watching her more closely than she realized, someone who noticed the way she filled her days but left her evenings empty, someone who sensed that she carried love she never allowed herself to use again, and though she did not say much after that, the air between them felt charged, as if a door had been opened just enough to let a draft of truth through, and Ethan did not press her, did not add more words, because he seemed to understand that the question itself was enough, and as the clock ticked softly and the coffee cooled in her cup, Margaret felt the weight of time, not as an enemy, but as a reminder that she was still here, still able to feel, still capable of choosing something other than quiet safety. And even when the conversation ended and Ethan left the room, the echo of his words stayed behind, filling the kitchen with a strange mix of sadness and hope, because for the first time in years Margaret wondered not what she had lost, but what she might still be turning away from, and that thought followed her long after the light shifted, long after the house settled, planting a question she could not ignore, a question born from love, spoken softly at a kitchen table, and strong enough to begin changing everything. The next morning, the house felt quieter than usual, yet the kitchen held a kind of tension that Margaret could not ignore, as she found Ethan sitting at the table, his book open but untouched, the sunlight falling on his thoughtful face, and she poured herself coffee, trying to speak casually, asking him why he had brought up such heavy thoughts the night before, and Ethan hesitated, his fingers tracing the edge of his book, his gaze fixed on the table as he finally spoke, admitting that he noticed the way she watched the world quietly, the way she smiled at neighbors and friends but never let herself fully connect, mentioning Mr. Harris, a widowed man who lived 2 houses down, someone who brought a small spark to her days, and how he had watched her over time, not to intrude, but because he cared enough to notice that she often held back from happiness, that she had settled into careful routines that left her alone more often than not, and as Ethan's words sank in, Margaret felt a mixture of embarrassment, surprise, and a strange warmth because it was true in ways she had tried to ignore, that life had continued around her, that love could still exist quietly, patiently, waiting for someone willing to see it, and Ethan's voice did not accuse or scold, it simply offered an observation, gentle yet precise, as if he were pointing out something she had known but refused to admit, and he told her he understood loss, that he knew how it could make people stop believing in new beginnings, but he also insisted that it did not have to mean the end of love, that there was still a chance to feel fully again if she allowed herself to step beyond fear, and Margaret felt tears threaten to fall, but she held herself, listening closely, realizing that Ethan, young as he was, seemed older than his years and his understanding, that he had the clarity and courage to speak what she herself had buried, to name what she could not, and she tried to answer him carefully, warning him that love and loss were not simple, that they left marks on hearts that sometimes never healed fully, yet Ethan only nodded, his eyes steady and sure, showing her that he had already accepted the weight of her experience and still chose to encourage hope, and in that moment Margaret felt a stirring in her chest, a sudden, undeniable longing she had not felt in years, a mix of fear and possibility, a reminder that she could still feel deeply, that the world could still surprise her, and the quiet kitchen seemed smaller, more intimate, as if holding the space between them, the smell of coffee and sunlight wrapping around them while her mind raced, remembering moments she had pushed aside, dreams she had labeled impossible, and she realized Ethan's presence, his insight, his care, was giving her permission to reconsider the life she had resigned herself to, that maybe careful did not have to mean lonely, that perhaps she could take small steps toward connection without rushing or risking recklessness, that a gentle opening of her heart could be enough, and as she watched Ethan, she felt an unusual pride, an admiration for his sensitivity, for the way he had spoken truth without expectation, without judgment, and she understood that these conversations, these quiet revelations at the kitchen table, were not just about noticing her, but about reminding her that life still held moments of beauty, unexpected companionship, and even love, and that evening, as she reflected alone, the words lingered. Soft but insistent, pressing her to reconsider, to feel, to take small but real chances, to allow herself the possibility of new beginnings, and even as she worried about stepping into the unknown, she felt the spark of something long dormant, the hope that connection and tenderness could return to her life, not as a reckless pursuit, but as a patient, careful, and profoundly human experience, and in that moment, Margaret realized that the quiet words of a thoughtful grandson had begun to shift her heart, to remind her that life was still unfolding, still full of potential, and that sometimes, it took someone else's perspective, even a young voice, to awaken the courage to notice what had always been there, the soft, persistent call of possibility, of love, and of feeling fully alive again. Margaret stood at her front window that afternoon, watching Daniel Harris walk his dog down the quiet street, the sunlight catching on his hair and the gentle sway of his movements, and she felt a flutter in her chest she had not experienced in years, a mixture of nervousness, excitement, and the faint sting of old regrets, because she realized that she had been avoiding more than just conversation, she had been avoiding the possibility of happiness, of connection, and of love again, and Ethan's words kept echoing in her mind, the gentle insistence that she should not miss something good because she was afraid, that life was not over, that her heart could still feel, and she realized that the choice before her was simple but daunting, to stay behind the curtain of routine, keeping herself safe, or to open the door and step into uncertainty with a chance at joy, and without fully thinking, her feet moved, carrying her outside where the air felt fresher, where the sun warmed her shoulders, and she called Daniel's name softly, her voice carrying a tremor she could not hide, and he turned, surprise and warmth spreading across his face, a smile that reached his eyes, and in that moment, Margaret felt a connection she had thought was long gone, a quiet spark that made her pulse quicken and her thoughts shift from the past to what could be, from memories of loss to moments of possibility, and they began to talk, initially about small, safe things, books, routines, the weather, but soon their words grew longer, deeper, more personal, each sentence building a bridge that neither had crossed before, and Margaret noticed how easy it was to speak, how natural it felt to laugh again, to share opinions, to let her voice be heard, and Daniel, gentle and patient, never rushed her, never pressed too hard, simply listened and responded with warmth, and as their conversation flowed, the initial hesitation melted away, leaving Margaret with a sense of lightness she had not remembered, a freedom that came from choosing to step forward, and when he asked if she would like to join him for coffee sometime, she felt her heart pause, the simple question carrying a weight of hope and potential, and she did not answer immediately, savoring the moment, feeling the thrill of possibility and the fear of vulnerability entwined, and later, as she returned inside, she sat at the kitchen table where Ethan had watched her with quiet curiosity, and he noticed the subtle smile on her lips, the way her eyes held a different light, and he asked gently what had happened, and Margaret looked at him with a softness she had not allowed herself to show for years, telling him that she might have been hiding from happiness, that she had been careful for too long, letting routines replace connection, and Ethan, ever perceptive, gave a small, knowing smile, a mixture of pride and relief, showing that he understood she had taken the first step toward allowing life to be fuller, and as Margaret reflected on the encounter, she realized that courage did not need to be loud, that small choices could lead to profound changes, that opening a door, literally and metaphorically, could bring warmth and companionship into a life she had thought would remain quiet and solitary. And that evening, as she prepared for dinner, her mind kept returning to the sunlight on Daniel's hair, the gentle cadence of his voice, the way he had made her feel seen and heard without pressure or expectation, and she understood that this small act of bravery, of stepping outside and speaking to him, was the beginning of a new chapter, one where she could let herself feel, laugh, and engage with the world again, where love was not reckless but possible, where connection was patient but real. And as she glanced at the empty chair across the kitchen table, she felt a swell of gratitude for Ethan, whose quiet words had nudged her toward this moment, reminding her that life could surprise her, that hearts could heal, and that happiness, even after loss, could arrive in small, meaningful gestures, quiet conversations, and the courage to step into the unknown with hope, leaving her with a sense of anticipation and tenderness she had not thought she would ever feel again. And she realized that the hardest step had been taken, the door had been opened, and now the rest of the path, though uncertain, seemed brighter, warmer, and full of possibilities she was finally ready to embrace. Weeks passed, and Margaret found herself waking each morning with a subtle excitement she had not felt in years, a gentle anticipation that made even ordinary routines feel lighter, because Daniel Harris had become a steady presence in her life, their walks and coffee dates weaving slowly into the fabric of her days, each conversation revealing layers of kindness, humor, and understanding that reminded her how warmth could exist without pressure, how connection could grow quietly but surely. And one evening, as sunlight faded into the soft glow of the kitchen light, Margaret sat once more at the table where so many pivotal conversations had begun, with Ethan across from her, his eyes alert yet calm, sensing the change in her demeanor, and she felt a surge of gratitude toward him. For his quiet words weeks earlier had nudged her heart awake, had reminded her that love was not limited by age, that careful steps could still lead to fulfillment, and she reached across the table, taking Ethan's hand, telling him softly that she wanted to thank him for helping her see that the past did not have to define the present, that it was possible to open her heart again, to embrace the small joys that had lingered unseen. And Ethan, blushing slightly but smiling with pride, said it was nothing, that he had simply spoken what he believed, that he had wanted her to remember that she deserved happiness. And in that moment, Margaret felt the truth of it sink deep inside her, a warmth spreading through her chest, an understanding that courage, love, and connection were not bound by youth or age, but by the willingness to feel and to act. And as she looked out the window later that evening, seeing Daniel pause across the street, looking back toward her with a gentle wave, she realized that life had offered her a second chance. Not dramatic or overwhelming, but quiet, patient, and deeply satisfying, that moments of tenderness and shared laughter could become the new rhythm of her days, and she understood that the quiet words of a grandson, spoken with honesty and care, had created a ripple that changed her world, that allowed her to remember what it felt like to be seen and cherished, to take emotional risks without fear, and to let her heart respond with joy rather than hesitation. And Margaret reflected on the journey from that first Sunday evening to now, seeing how a simple, gentle observation had shifted her perspective, how a patient, loving presence in Daniel had met her halfway, and how she could now imagine a future filled with connection, companionship, and even love, unfolding slowly but fully, with gratitude and hope intertwined. And she knew that every soft smile, every shared story, every moment of understanding with him was a testament to the power of stepping forward, of listening, and of allowing the heart to remember its capacity to feel. And she thought of Ethan again, realizing that some words linger forever, echoing quietly but insistently, shaping lives, opening doors, and inspiring courage. And in the warmth of the kitchen light, Margaret felt complete in a way she had long forgotten, aware that happiness could be simple, enduring, and richly human, built not on grand gestures but on honesty, patience, and the courage to embrace possibility. And as night fell and the house grew still, she smiled, knowing that the echoes of her grandson's words would remain with her always, a reminder that love, in all its gentle forms, could arrive at any stage of life and transform it quietly, beautifully, and irrevocably.